from New York, Kevin McCullough. Glad you're with us as we are keeping our eye on what's going on in the middle of the day. And I just got to tell you, just before we went on, story broke. People were reporting, and now we have told you that the judge in the Nidal Hassan Fort Hood shooting case is disallowing any evidence to be put forward that this is related to terrorism in any way. And this is from a judge. It's a military judge, military tribunal. This is a Colonel, Tara Osborne, who, she serves in the same armed forces that these soldiers were killed in by this traitor, by this guy who switched his affections from the uniform that he wore to the covert terrorist mask that he wished to wear. And they're disallowing his communications between he and Anwar al-Awlaki. They are disallowing his writings. They are disallowing the fact that he said Allahu Akbar in the process of shooting. To be administered as evidence into the case. Your reaction to this? The downside is he will. It's not likely that this will affect the verdict. He's gonna be found guilty. That because he's already admitted that he did the shooting and did the killing, in his own opening statement, because he is representing himself. But this additional restriction that the judge is putting on this now prevents the families of the incident, the victims and the victims' families of the incident, from receiving what would be a certain degree of benefits from the military based on a terrorist-related kill. And I think that's injustice. I don't know what this judge, I don't know what her rationale is. She's not really giving a rationale. She's not really explaining why she's doing this the way that she is. And I find it, I don't know. Bert was just in the studio. I want to be a nice, polite guy like him, when I grow up someday. But I have to use the word repugnant. I find it hurtful. The lawyers representing the family members are outraged when an Army judge limited prosecutors from introducing evidence, including emails to a known al-Qaeda operative, as jihadi motives. The judge ruled that prosecutors could not mention Hassan's correspondence with Awlaki. Osborne also barred prosecutors from mentioning Hassan's interest in seeking conscientious objector status and drawing parallels to a 2003 incident in which another Muslim soldier attacked U.S. troops in Kuwait. The judge found much of that evidence was too old, but permitted prosecutors to introduce evidence about Hassan's internet usage and search history from the time of the attack. Why can't they introduce, I'm sorry, all of it? It just seems to me that it's got to, we're only telling ourselves half the story, and this is for posterity. This is going to be written about. This is going to be a major legal case that's going to go in the history books. It's foolishness to me. Let's go to Judy in Texas. Judy, you're up next on AFA Today with Kevin McCullough. Glad you're here.
Oh, thank you. I've been listening to AFR for years, and I just want to know how much I appreciate all of you.
Thank you.
Probably 20 years. But you asked the question why this is happening or why she's allowing this. And then the caller before, something about who's behind all this. Well, I know from listening to AFR that a lot of times, you have to be nice, polite commentators or talk show hosts. So I'm just going to say it. What maybe you can't say is what is behind it. But the term I like to use is the Obama mafia, to strong-arm people into voting for Obamacare and whatever else, everything else he does. And it's all because of what the Marxist regime he was trained in to take this country. It's behind it all. And then Islamic idea, if anyone's ever studied any of that, their whole idea is to take over the rest of the world. If you can't do it by force, to go in through the government and do it peacefully and infiltrate the government. And, you know, you've reported on this, how much Muslim Brotherhood is everywhere in Washington, D.C., in the White House. That's what's behind it all. It's their way of, it's like putting the frogs in the cold water and just bringing the boil up a little at a time, so we really don't know what we're getting.
Yeah.
And we need to wake up. This thing from Fort Hood, we need to wake up. It's so close to me because my son, who had just got back from Afghanistan just a few months before that, or maybe a few weeks, I don't remember now, was like a block away. And I knew before it ever hit the news that he had shouted out Allah Akbar, which we know that's jihad. But I also knew the leader of our nation, who is leading us and our troops, would put it all I knew that it would be political correctness. And sure enough, that's what it is. And everyone they're so afraid of him and what he's going to do. That's why this judge is doing that.
It is scary, Judy. Thank you for the call. Appreciate your articulate and well-rounded nature. You didn't get me in trouble, and that's good. We don't want to stir up passion just for passion's sake, but it's there's nothing against the rules of being offended by something that is truly offensive. Not in the AFA Today world, at least. Let's talk to Mark in Texas. Hi, Mark. You're on AFA Today with Kevin McCullough. Glad you're here.
Yeah, listen, I'm in the Fort Hood area, and this has really been a public affairs disaster for the Department of Defense and the Army. I would really encourage you, just to be fair, to contact the the Fort Hood Public Affairs Office, or even the Office of Public Affairs at the Pentagon, and ask these hard questions, because the perception is outlandish. There's a legal reason why they won't introduce this. Okay, I'll buy it, but no one in the media except your organization is even raising the question.
Right.
That's what's so infuriating to the American public is, why isn't the media asking the hard questions that you're asking? And then why? And there's the military, the Army, and the Department of Defense has fantastic public affairs resources. Believe me, they're well staffed, well funded, and they should have.
Mark, I actually speak with them off the air all the time. And they don't have an explanation for this right now. Her defense in the trial yesterday was they were deemed too old to be admissible. But if you're talking about, here's what I can't quite comprehend, and neither could the public affairs officer that I spoke with. If you're talking about building a case and saying this was an attack that was dozens of years in the making. That it started out with someone just beginning to be indoctrinated and going all the way to activism, all the way to planning, all the way to then the actual event occurring. And you have the administration writing it off as, a discontented worker that went nutso in the workplace violence. It's a completely dishonest approach to the narrative of what actually happened and the pieces of the story that we actually do have evidence on.
To be an immediate investigation to find out what agency or what organizations within the government influenced this judge. That should be an investigation immediately if it doesn't line up with any law within the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And to be fair now, we should speak with a legal, someone who's very well versed in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, to be fair and impartial. But the perception, which is reality in this case, is that there's some kind of a influence. If this is part of some type of strategic communication plan for the Department of State, where they don't want to offend or those in the Middle East or the Islamic community, will just come out and say it, but don't alter the course of history and justice, and not tell the American the truth. They need to go ugly early, as they say, and get maximum disclosure with minimal delay.
Right.
I'm really ashamed of our Department of the Army's public affairs program if they can't explain something as so simplistic as this.
Well, Mark, and I run a media company, so I live in the world of marketing all the time. And one of the things you touched on it that you do early on is if there's bad news to tell, you tell it. You don't wait for other people to discover it and tell it, because you will never have a better opportunity to frame the debate than when you tell it. If you wait for others to tell it, it becomes a much different animal. In this particular case, there have been questions from day one that people have asked. In fairness, why we pay his salary, why there's not a dime of benefits going to the victims' families, why this particular angle is being so rigidly enforced in this trial. When even if you were in a civil courtroom, you wouldn't have the judge saying you can't say such and such in your statements. He may direct the jury to dismiss certain bodies of testimony or whatever, but he's never going to tell the attorneys that you can't cite this or as part of this as your case. And usually the tribunals in the military code are even a little more flexible with in terms of what they, because the measure of what it has to rise to the degree of is very different and not quite as strict as the civilian court. So it's an even bigger head scratcher as to why she's made this ruling.
Well, and I think that's the tragedy of it, is they can't communicate a simple message. They can't explain the very basics. Now, if you're telling the American people that you've coordinated with the Public Affairs Office and they can't explain this, then that's a travesty. That is a failure on behalf of the Army, and it's a failure on behalf of the administration to tell the truth, to go, as they say, go ugly early.
Yeah.
And,
well, the explanation that we're getting is what the judge herself gave, and that is that she felt that particular body of evidence was too old, and I just disagree. I just think you can't just judge this within this tiny little time parameter. This was a guy who was in the military doing his thing, and at some point in time began to be influenced by an outside stimulus and began to turn more and more towards that. And there was this cycling narrative that continued to grow in terms of his commitment, frustration, record of his work quality within the military, some of the things that he began to lag on his job on, and other things. And there was concern to identify him to be, expecting something bad to come about, and maybe to have even removed him from his position before it got to the point that it did. But where is that explanation? Is that really left to the job of people like me with a microphone to have to go back and put those pieces together? Shouldn't that be part of what the trial itself discovers? But if you're being told by a judge, you're not allowed to look at that part of it. Well, that doesn't do us any good in trying to even analyze for how we avoid these situations in the future. Thanks, Mark, for the call. I appreciate it. Let's go to Monroe, Oregon, or Monroe in Oregon. Monroe, welcome. You're on with Kevin McCullough on AFA Today.
Yeah, I just have a comment. We're at war with what we call radical jihad.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think it ought to be called orthodox jihad. If you follow the Quran, the people we're calling radical would all be radical if they followed the Quran as it's written. So I think it's more orthodox jihad we're at war with. And so I consider these people that were killed at Fort Hood as people who died in combat. They were killed in
Absolutely.
action. And
yep.
I think that this man infiltrated our military. He's an enemy combatant who infiltrated our military, and I think the military has got egg on their face because of that, and they're just covering their butts now, and that's why they're doing everything they're doing. That's why they're calling it workplace violence. That's why they don't want this evidence in there. And I think
well, and Monroe, when you think about it, not only is there egg on their face, here's the truth of the matter, and thanks for the call. The moment, if you're a military person, the moment you turn violence against fellow military officers and service people, the minute you turn a gun on them, I don't care whether you're an Islamic extremist or not. That is an enemy combatant. You are executing our defense forces in your desire to kill as many of them as possible. You've become so I don't even think it has to qualify as being technically even part of the war on terror. But that aside, In other words, to not be workplace violence. But that aside, there's all this evidence that it was, including what he was saying while he was shooting, including the long history he had of seeking the advice of this al-Qaeda cleric, including the search histories, which she did allow, and the internet usage, which she did allow. But she's not allowing them to use the word jihad. She's not allowing them to use the words, Islamist or terrorist or anything like that in the discussion of his charges. He's going to be found guilty. The only downside, because he's admitted to the crime, the only downside that's now going to be, not exhibited that would if he was held accountable, is that the victims' families are going to be left out in the cold. And of all the money that the government spends, the money we pay to the families of those who lose a family member in defense of our country, that's the one area of government spending I don't have a problem with. Let's carve up Obamacare and give some of that to these families. If we're going to tax people, funding our troops and funding the families of our troops when those troops die, that's not a problem for me. The rest of the monkey business, keep for yourself. Kevin McCullough, glad you're with us. The Kevin McCullough Show tonight on many of these same stations, and we will see you again tomorrow here for AFA Today on AFR Talk.